You're with Julian on the Brown Notes in the world's most comfortable DJ chair. This is the best chair I've ever sat in. It's amazing. And Biden and the disgrace of the Democrats. So, last time around, we saw an America that was pivoting from one side, the Republican side, that had been building up to right-wing fascism, if that's not tautology, for probably 20 years. And the other side, which was an America that had gone through the global financial crisis and was the most progressive America there'd been. And we saw two very strong turnout campaigns from Bernie Sanders. But the Biden campaign triumphed under a guise that they would recognize the progressives and the progressive elements of the new government, and that society needed to be fairer than just rewarding the wealthy. Obviously, the Democrats in America aren't like the Labour Party should be. They're actually much more like, I guess, the Liberal Democrats, but they're a centre-right party more, and this was the most left that they'd been. But instead, they've just relied on Trump. They relied on Trump to get across the line in the election that Biden won, and their entire game plan ever since has just been to rely on Trump being there. The problem they've got there is that, yes, if they can galvanize America who hate Trump to vote, they'll outnumber the Trump voters. But they're not going to galvanize and energize everyone every time to defeat Trump. And all the Trump voter needs is for a portion of that electorate that turned out in record numbers to defeat Trump, not to reward Biden for doing anything. You only need to shave a few percent off of that voting base through lethargy and apathy, and you're left with a voting bloc that will vote 100% for their man every time. They are the reason I said a disgrace is because they have never provided an alternative timeline to Biden. Biden is very old and at the end, and they've never looked to providing an alternative. They should have been buttering up and promoting 5 or 6 young candidates to replace Biden the second he got in office, and they've offered no one. Kamala Harris has just sat in the background doing nothing. And they're just relying again, 4 years later, on the anti-Trump vote getting across the line. They have ignored the progressives in America. They've ignored the swing states. There's 3 swing states that actually gave Trump the election the first time. They are polling very, very badly for the Democrats this time. They've ignored these people, and they've sidelined the progressives that have come into the Democratic Party as well. In fact, you rarely hear about anyone other than Biden. Where's the replacement for Biden? Why didn't they replace him now instead of taking him all the way through to another election where people might just turn around and go, we just don't care anymore? It's a tragedy that seems to have to be by design, that every time the left party come in power, there's always some sort of economic tsunami going on. So we had the Obama administration come in, and the Republican-fueled global financial crisis took over the entire time he was in office and destroyed a lot of the possible progressive action economically he could have taken by him taking ownership of that. And now we've got this cost of living crisis in Australia and in America that is doing the same thing. But they're not focusing on it. They're focusing on war. They're focusing on the war in Ukraine and now the war in Gaza. And this is a massive distraction. All we seem to hear from Biden is him asking money for Ukraine. Now, the fact that they have now... They had some form of moral legitimacy in claiming to defend the smaller country of Ukraine with the smaller military from being invaded by the much bigger, more powerful Russia. That's gone now with their support of Israel. because they're doing the opposite. They're supporting the much more powerful aggressor and asking for money for the much more powerful aggressor, occupier as well. And the rest of the world that isn't the West is looking at this as massive hypocrisy. And the public of the West are looking at this as massive hypocrisy. You're getting hundreds of thousands of people turning out in the streets in the West to protest what's happening in Gaza on the side of the Palestinians. So Biden has managed to take an America that was chastened by the Gulf Wars and the war in Iraq, in Afghanistan, and in the interaction in Syria and Libya, and it all went quiet, being the world's policeman for a little bit. And then they've roared back in with both the Cold War against Russia and the hypocritical lying wars that they had in the Iraq-Afghan era with what's happening in Israel and the Gaza Strip. And him begging for money from Congress every month to fuel both sides. And everyone else is looking at them going, you're hypocritical, aren't you? He's burning up goodwill like crazy, and the polls now are showing him to be dying. But that's not strictly true. This is from Slate magazine. Tuesday night, Democrats once again defied the worsening unpopularity of President Joe Biden by winning or dramatically exceeding expectations in nearly every single election of significance across the country. In doing so, they provided a pretty definitive answer to the question which is more important to voters today: Biden's woes or the ongoing backlash against the Republican Party on overreach issues like abortion, trans rights, and free speech in public schools. But to reverse his slide in time to win an election, Biden must directly address the sources of his struggles, including lingering dissatisfaction with high inflation and interest rates. Democrats pulled off a near total sweep of important elections just one day after a series of almost preposterously dire battleground state polls were released by the New York Times. So on the ground at the moment, it is looking much more favourable for the Democrats doing well, but they're just taking it for granted. Now, the reason it's a disgrace is because they've got this rise of fascism in their country. And that should be the number one focus of what they're doing. They should be focusing on the fact that the most powerful nation in the world came this close to becoming a fascist dictatorship, even to the point of an attempted overthrow of government. And they're just sleepwalking into oblivion. And that's where the disgrace is. They should be focused 100% on the fact that half their country is kind of okay with someone like Trump coming back in and just taking over and ignoring all of the rules they've set up for a democratic country and doing whatever the hell they want. Majority of Republicans supported the January 6th overthrow of the elected government in America. Over 50%. And the Democrats aren't addressing this. Biden is focusing on these Bush-era administration foreign policy bojangles. They need to focus on the ground on what's happening in their country, because they're always seemingly one step away from fascism. They need to focus on the cost of living and the fact that these swing states are swinging back against them again. And that's all they need to lose, those 3 states, or what did it to them the first time that Trump was elected. And the fact that they're even, we're this far into the criminality of Trump, and he's still allowed to be a candidate, which is mind-blowing. So anyway, that's the disgrace of Biden and the Democrats. I would seriously recommend putting someone else in, but I think they've left it too late. Even if it is Kamala Harris, just do it now. And let her weather everything. Apparently she is very, very thin-skinned, but they need to do something and stop, old man Biden just focusing on wars overseas while their own country slides into fascism.